EL.com joins us right now. And by the way, I mentioned it earlier. I'll mention it again. John has a book that is coming out later this summer, The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban, How Alabama's Coach Became the Greatest Ever. That's coming up and will be available later this summer. I'm assuming that you can pre-order that right now. Is that accurate, John?
You can indeed. I think Brian can say Amazon's already trying to prompt him to pre-order it, so it's out there. You can do it now.
Well, you better hope that somebody buys it for Haydad, because getting into his wallet, I mean, that's not easy to do.
Or maybe a good friend could have already agreed to send him a free copy. I don't know.
If we believe Brian is capable of reading, he should be able to read the book soon.
Oh!
Hey!
Now it's on, Talty.
There you go. Hey, so what's the flavor of the day at SEC spring meetings? What's the story that we're looking at most today?
Yeah, I feel like it's been fairly quiet today. I think there was a lot of build-up to what Jimbo Fisher was going to say today. Didn't talk yesterday. There was a lot of hype. All right, is he going to kind of let Nick Saban have it again? And he ultimately did not. It was a very kind of reminded me of Bill Belichick. It's kind of like, we're on Cincinnati. It was a lot of I'm moving on, we're moving on. I mean, he got a lot of questions today, hammering him from different angles about it, and he deflected all of those. I'm sure at least some of that was at the direction of the SEC to not further inflame that situation. So that was a bit of a dud, I guess, in some regard. I think the other big topic that I think is going to continue to kind of some way shape this week down here is just looking at scheduling model, looking at the future of divisions, things like that. It's not necessarily the sexiest topic, but of course will impact all these different schools. And that's something that I think has been dominating the conversations in these different meetings that ADs and coaches and others are having this week down here in Destin.
Yeah, John, that's something we were talking about just a segment ago about, looking like it's ultimately headed to 9 and who that's good for. I mean, Ross Dellinger, colleague of yours at Sports Illustrated, I know you've known Ross for a long time, wrote the story a couple of weeks ago and said it was kind of split, and it was basically split based on revenue. Like the top 8 revenue schools in the SEC want to go to 9, and the bottom 8 revenue schools want to go to want to stay at 8. Is there any movement in your mind on that front between who is for it and who's not?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It feels like there are some people potentially swaying different directions. So I think there's multiple parts to this. There's it's the 8 or 9, right? Like you guys are saying, and then the kind of second piece of that is, is it 1, plus 7 or 1 plus 8, or is it going to be 3 permanent opponents and then plus 6? And so that's also kind of within that debate. There's that question. I think Commissioner Sankey pretty much said it yesterday that the days of 2 divisions are pretty much over for the SEC. I don't know when exactly that will go into effect. That's part of the scheduling conversation, but there's multiple different parts to it. But to your point, and I was talking to some people about this here earlier, if you're an Ole Miss or a Mississippi State, yes, there's the potential for more revenue, if they can get more TV money out of going to 9 games and things like that. But at a certain point, what does that money get you? Yes, it's great to have more money, but it's getting harder for you, and it's going to get harder for you to make bowl games. Once you add Texas and Oklahoma, that makes things harder too. And so I do think there are some schools, kind of like Ross said, breaking down a little bit down the middle. I think there's probably more to one side than the other right now, but and Alabama is always going to be 4-9. They're not worried about it at all. They're fine with it. Let's do it. Georgia at this point, let's do it. But I think that your Mississippi State, your South Carolina, your Vanderbilt, your Missouri, there's less incentive for them to make that switch beyond just some more money. But that doesn't necessarily mean much to you when you're just trying to have good seasons and build momentum and make bowl games and things like that.
And John, I would argue, and this might be unpopular in your home state of Alabama, that Auburn should look at it that way as well. Because even though Auburn fancies itself as kind of on the same level as Alabama and Georgia, the reality is they're not. They're an 8-win team, year in and year out. I know there's the outlier, and maybe the outlier in both directions. But shouldn't Auburn be a team that's like, you know what, we're good with 8?
Yeah, I mean, certainly they wouldn't want any change anytime soon. I mean, that team will probably struggle to get to 7-8 wins this year as it is, let alone taking away one of their easier non-conference games and bumping it up with another SEC game. They lost multiple games last year that you would think that, or teams that they basically have to win, teams like South Carolina, Mississippi State, and those are games at Auburn. If they're going to have the year that their fan base thinks they should have, has to win those games. So you're adding another difficult game to the mix. The other thing, a part of that too, is again, it's what Auburn might publicly say that they want versus privately. I think it's different. And of course, no matter what scheduling model we get, they're going to play Alabama in the Iron Bowl every year, just like Ole Miss and Mississippi State are always going to play each other in the Egg Bowl. But deep down, I would think that Auburn does not want to have to play Georgia every single year if they can avoid that. And so I think there's some value in them potentially wanting that, only one permanent opponent model, even if publicly they might have to pretend like, we want to play Georgia, we like them. I think deep down they probably don't want to play Georgia every year, because that's a game that, especially the way Kirby Smart has things going, kind of feels like a loss most years.
There would be so many people that would be upset about not being able to every single year say the Deep South's oldest rivalry. We would lose that.
And that's the challenge. It's the challenge that comes with this, because if you think about, for Alabama, right now you have, of course, Alabama, Auburn's always going to be there. But if you move to just the one permanent opponent, you are not going to have every year of Alabama versus Tennessee, which is, a big game to Alabama fans and Tennessee fans. And, you're not going to have Alabama LSU every year, which has been one of the highest rated games every single year, I think, for the last decade for the SEC. And so there's going to be some really marquee games that won't happen. I mean, Ole Miss fans love to talk about how their top rival is LSU. I mean, if it's only one permanent model, you're not going to play LSU every year. So there's going to be some fans that I think will be upset about that if it ends up going that direction.
I feel like from the people that I've talked to at kind of the league office level, the whole Texas and OU are coming early. Like, that conversation has almost died, and yet you still see stories pop up that say, when are OU and Texas coming? Is there any discussion at all, even if it's like behind the scenes, off the radar, about OU and Texas coming a year early, or in your mind has that ship kind of sailed?
I don't think it's completely sailed. I mean, I think you look at it, it's ultimately one of the situations where, the Classic, it takes, 2 to tango, basically. In this situation, it's kind of 3, in that would the SEC love to have Texas and Oklahoma early? Of course they would. They're 2 marquee brands. Would ESPN, in particular, for when they take over the CBS part of that deal, TV rights deal in 2024, would they love for Texas and Oklahoma to be at the SEC, a year early? Can't say it on the record officially, but of course they would. The big impediment is the Big 12, and why would the Big 12 want to let 2 of its most marquee, famous brands in Texas and Oklahoma leave a year early? I think there's a lot of, certainly under Bob Bowlesby, there felt like that kind of pettiness of spite, and we're going to wring every last penny out of these 2 schools as we can before they leave for the SEC. The wild card that I've come back to a couple of times is that the Big 12 is looking for a new commissioner right now. They haven't made that hire yet. In theory, a new person could come in, take over that conference, and say, you know what, let's just let these 2 go early. We'll get our schools in earlier. We'll turn the page. We'll move on. Now, do I think that's going to happen? I think it's not super likely at this moment, but I think if it's going to happen, it's going to take a certain kind of leader taking over the Big 12 and saying, let's work with the SEC, let's work with Texas and Oklahoma, and find a solution that doesn't require them staying until their contract currently obligates them to.
You heard any names, rumblings about the Big 12 commissioner, who that might be, or who might be in the running for that?
So here's what I'll say, is that the same search firm that is doing this Big 12 search has also done the ACC search, the Big 10 search, and the Pac-12 search. So they've done all of the big commissioner searches in the last couple of years. And if you look at who those conferences hired, I don't know if any of those names might have been on the initial short list. Certainly, I mean, there was a lot of, well, here's the obvious guy. I remember the Big 10, the obvious guy felt like Jim Phillips, Northwestern AD, super well liked in the Big 10, doesn't get the job. Then he ends up as the ACC commissioner. I don't think anyone had him pinned for that. So this search firm likes to go outside the box. They like to hire people that aren't necessarily on the radar. Have there been names within the SEC been mentioned for it? Of course. I think Alabama AD Greg Byrne is always going to get mentioned for these commissioner jobs that open up. He was also mentioned for the Pac-12 one. But I think that Turnkey, which is running the Big 12 search, likes to do things differently. And so it's almost hard to pinpoint who I think it will be, because I think it's going to more likely than not be a name that's not the obvious name right off the bat.
John, good stuff, man. Appreciate your time, and look forward to talking to you again as we get closer to the launch of your book coming out later.